Peace, peace and blessings. Hope that all are well. Today, talking about a topic that's quite important to me. A topic that probably has been my focus for the past, 5 to 6 years. And just like where my mind has been, right? This concept of spirituality, but specifically African spirituality, the traditions that melanated people had around the world before colonization, right? These nature-based traditions, right? We've talked a lot about the African perspective and, what it is to think from that state of mind, how it is we can exist from that state. What are some of the challenges that come along with being a melanated person, right? But this practice of being in alignment with nature as an African person through the African perspective, I think can be summed up in our spiritual practices, right? So what I'm going to do today is give us a framework of understanding how these spiritual philosophies have developed and talk a little bit about, how we can take that framework to apply to whatever, tradition that we believe in as individuals, whether they be, traditional African or, just the common faiths of today, like Christianity or Islam, right? But how do we apply these principles? How do we apply this same framework to our spiritual lives and carry it forth, right? So when it comes to this concept of African spirituality, I would say when I really started to understand the philosophy behind it, right? Not just like a religion where you're told these are the rules, this is what you're supposed to do, these are the pieces of it, and we do this, every week, or every day. But rather an understanding of this is why we do what we do. This is the science that goes behind it. This is the history that goes behind it. My first time understanding that was through Professor Kaba Kamene's work, right? Specifically the book Spirituality Before Religions, right? And the tagline on this book here, it says that spirituality is unseen science, and science is seen spirituality, right? So this reaches back to this concept of that spirituality and science are unified, right? They aren't separate. When we're talking about looking at the world from the African perspective, the masculine and the feminine are not separate. Science and spirituality are not separate, right? The sciences and the arts are not separate, right? These things are two sides of the same coin, right? They're part of a duality that makes up, everything that exists, right? So in this book, what Professor Kaba does is he really takes you through the evolution of life on Earth, right, as it began in Africa. It helps us understand some of these early civilizations, some of these early precursors to religion or spiritual traditions at large, which are these traditions of Egypt, right? Ancient Egypt or Kemet, right? The Kemetic or Cushitic legacy, right? So that was a very important book along my journey for sure. Just helping me understand the science of it, right? Because growing up, I had become to be, and I still consider myself a very logical person, right? Things have to make sense, um, to some extent. Like things have to line up. You know what I'm saying? Um, but yeah, so I really appreciate the perspective that Professor Kamene takes in this book, and I think it's an essential read for anybody interested in African spirituality, right? But my first introductions to this concept came from Ancestor Malidoma Somé, right? Now I've talked about both of these people's works, but I've talked about, Ancestor Somé's book of Water and the Spirit, right? And that is his autobiography, right? And, I grouped that book with this book here, The Healing Wisdom of Africa, because these really gave me like that first hand account, right? Elder Kamene, right? Professor Kamene, he's an American. He's a Black American, right? Right. So he gives us that perspective, looking back through Africana studies and our ancestors who have done this academic research, right? But Ancestor Somé gives it from the other side of the coin, where he actually lived. He has lived experience of traditional African culture, right? And he has lived experience of the difference between Western or European culture and traditional African culture, right? But in this book in particular, The Hidden Wisdom of Africa, Ancestor Somé introduced me to this concept of finding our purpose as individuals and communities through the concept of ritual, right? Ritual in nature. And having certain community roles, right? So when it came to like my introduction into this world, it was really through those two books, right? And I've studied, different things along the way. A lot of that study has been self-study, studying myself, studying my thoughts, right? My understanding and intuitions about this whole thing, right? And think about spirituality too, like it is a very subjective experience, I would say. It's a subjective experience of everything that is everything, right? Spirituality is this aspect of the human experience where we are trying to experience ourselves as part of, the Most High Creator, in whichever way we conceptualize that, right? But we have all of these different religions around the world, all these different spiritual traditions. So when it comes down to it, spirituality is really a subjective thing, but there is a common thread that I've been able to identify as I've studied and looked through this concept of African spirituality. It's very important to understand that even within Africa, like, there are many, many different cultures, many different, ethnic groups and ways of understanding the world. Is very diverse, right? But what happened with Black Americans, our perception of African spirituality is not only skewed in the sense of, it's been demonized, but it's also skewed in the sense of when we hear this word, we may think of all that as the same thing, right? All of it is voodoo, right? But there are, differences when we talk about this. But before we get into the differences, like I said, I want to go through this common thread, this common journey that has been outlined, right? And it's going to be a good review of our past lectures as well, right? But the first thing when we're talking about spirituality or the awareness of creation within and around us, we have to start with Adam, right? In the beginning, there was darkness, and then there was this atom of light, right? This spark of life, of matter, right? And in particular, one of these atoms happened to be carbon, right? One of these fundamental atoms of creation happened to be carbon. And carbon is this building block for everything. Most of the molecules that we deal with today, most of the things that make up existence depend on carbon, right? Carbon is the building block. It allows things to connect. It's very adaptable. It's very flexible. And as we've discussed, carbon is also the fundamental essence of this molecule melanin, right? The darkness of things, particularly either our skin or the pigmentation of our brain and our organ systems, right? Our nervous system. So this carbon, right? So we had this fundamental spark of life. One of these fundamental elements happened to be carbon. And then through these connections, the universe began to form, right? So that darkness was the infinite potential of the creator, right? Before anything began, the infinite potential of the creator, just the creator. And then the thought, right, of coming into being, coming into existence was that first spark of matter, right? And those fundamental elements like carbon then began to organize themselves into these things we know as galaxies, right? And then the Milky Way galaxy, we have, our solar system, right? Right, this is our central star, the sun. And the sun is responsible for the earth itself. You know what I'm saying? Without the sun, the earth could not come into being. Right? And everything on the earth, particularly life, is not possible without the sun, right? And we get back into this concept of carbon and this concept of absorption or darkness absorbing light, right? That's what plants do in the process of photosynthesis, right? The green pigmentation of plants is chlorophyll, right? Chlorophyll is the plant version of melanin, or melanin is the human version of chlorophyll, right? It allows for this process of converting this light, heat, sound energy that comes from the sun into abundant vegetation, into energy, into creation, right? Into life. So the origins of life on the earth, right, happened in Africa. First people were black people, right? And these early black people came into existence. I've heard it explained like this, right? If we think about the 24-hour day, or I'm sorry, if we think about the calendar year, right? January through December. It is said that humanity did not come into existence until December 31st, 11:59:59. All of the rest of the calendar was the formation of the universe from its beginnings, the formation of all these galaxies, the formation of all these planets. Then at the very last second of that time period comes us, humanity, right? So that's just to put into context all of the history, all of the time, all of the divine order that took place for us to even get here, to Africa. So when it comes to spirituality, which is coming into an awareness of that, tapping into that which comes before us, or the origins of our lives, that's why it's so grand. That's why it's so magnificent. But the process of becoming aware of that reality has to do with the nervous system, right? It is the nervous system through which the human body receives input, right? All of the light and heat and sound that we take in, the taste, the touch, the pain, the fear, right? I'm talking about these ancient humans, right? Who are having to figure it out in the tropical jungles of Africa, right? Sustaining and continuing this humanity that has come into being without any real guidance, right? There's no language as we know it. There's simply sensation, the sensations of the body, right? So the nervous system is taking in all of this information, right? And the nervous system, through the process of the brain, is going to begin to pick up on patterns, right? And patterns is where the thinking process becomes important, right? And the thinking process is made possible by these things called neurons, right? So now these early humans are experiencing the world, they're experiencing their bodies, all of these sensations, but they're coming up on certain patterns, right? For example, they notice about every 3 months or so, or what we know is 3 months or so, the season changes, right? Goes from winter to spring, from spring to summer to fall, right? That's a pattern. Even more immediate than that, the body picks up on the pattern of day and night, right? In the daytime, when the sun is out, I have a lot of energy. I'm out and about. I can see things. When the night rolls around, it's very dark. I can't see anything. I'm going to go to sleep. Right? So the body begins to formulate these habits, right? And over the process of evolution, shortcuts are formed, right? These subconscious things, right? These subconscious actions that we no longer have to deal with as a human race, that allows us to then move to this higher elevation of creative thought, this higher elevation, this higher awareness of what it is that we're capable of, right? So, let's talk about the transition from being hunter-gatherers to agriculturalists, right? No longer do I have to spend all of my daytime hunting for food, right? And then processing that meat what I'm saying, to nourish and survive, right? But now I've found out how I can take the seeds from these fruits and grains and vegetables, plant them in the ground, and then year round I'm able to reap things that can help me nourish myself, right? So now I don't have to spend so much of my day on that. Now I'm spending more of my day figuring out how to be more efficient with my agriculture, right? I start to build tools, like a rake, right? Or shovel, for example. You know, I start to optimize my understanding of these patterns. And then that process continues to where we have all of these mental models, is what they're called, when you have this automatic response to a certain stimuli, right? This concept of an algorithm comes from the brain having a mental model for things, right? If I know that, you know, I want to produce food, then like over the process of evolution, the human race has evolved to say, I'm going to plant these things. I'm going to build the tools to get to that end, right? The mind sets itself on that goal automatically, just out of the necessity, that drive, that program to survive and thrive, right? But then we transition to a higher state to where not only are we engaging in agriculture, but we're also developing other things that go along with the civilization, like architecture. We're building our own homes. You know what I'm saying? And we're learning about math and science behind that, right? We're learning about engineering, how to make certain materials, right? So it's just, I'll say all of this, it's just a long-winded way of saying, like, the mind developed to be creative and to continue to thrive. But then we got to a certain point in our history to where after millennia, like hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years of doing these same things, of observing these same patterns, what we had to do in order to call forth that amount of information is we had to turn it into stories. I don't have time to rework, how they say, don't rebuild the wheel. I don't have the time to go through the whole mental process of what it means to be a civilized human being every day, right? It becomes a habit, right? So as we became civilized and we developed this understanding of, living with ourselves and nature and each other, that we developed codes of ethics and morals, and we developed an understanding of math and science and the origins of life on our earth, right? So we talked about this principle of ma'at before, right? Just a judgment scene of ma'at where the heart is weighed against the feather, right? And this scene is representative of the ancient Africans' value on living in alignment with nature, living in alignment with the laws that have been set out for us, right? And again, we understood these laws through our thousands and thousands of years on the earth and our thousands and thousands of years of refinement in our creative thinking, right? So that what we begin to pass down through the process of education and thinking, an apprenticeship, was these principles, right? So now we have the foundations of early government. We have the foundations of early commerce and economics. And some of the, grandest displays of the intelligence of the ancient world can be seen in some of these structures like pyramids, right? The math, science, astrology, understanding of materials, understanding of agriculture, understanding of logistics, and a workforce without any modern day technology, without any modern day tools. There are no cranes. You know what I'm saying? To think about the grandness of what the human being grew to accomplish, right? All through this process of creativity, this creative thought, right? And, one may ask, what does all this have to do with spirituality? Because, when we talk about spirituality, we often think two religions, right? We think about Christianity, we think about Islam, we think about, India and China and their traditions, right? The foundations of African spirituality have to do with the development and application of creative thought. Realizing that creative thought in the human being is what connects us to the Creator, that it was the creative thought of the Creator that brought creation into existence. So that to exercise and to develop my creative thought and bring a life of thriving existence into being is to abide by God's law, right? That is where that is the essence of it, right? But then as humanity develops, we develop these traditions and these philosophies and these ritualized practices around attuning ourselves to that reality, right? So that when new people are born, they can easily assimilate what it means or what we have learned over thousands of years to be a right and just human being in alignment with nature and the laws of the Creator, right? So on the note of these ritualized practices, right? Say, for example, in a community, it has been recognized that the nature of water is cooling, right? It's soothing, it's relaxing, maybe in the process of, building tools, somebody burned themselves. And they went to the waters to, cool themselves. Or after a hard day's work, and one is covered in grime and dirt, they understood that they could go to the water to clean themselves off, to relieve themselves of all the grime, all of the dirt, to clean their eyes so they could see more clearly, to look into the water and to see a reflection, right? So they become aware of the essence of water, the different things that water brings. So say as a community, as a family, they recognize themselves to get into this symbolic situation, right? They find themselves living out this metaphor of there's a lot of arguments, there's, a lot of miscommunication, there's a lot of disconnect. Everybody's having a hard time understanding each other. So they say, you know what? Why don't we take this metaphor and reap the benefits of what water has symbolized in our day-to-day life, right? So let's honor the spirit of water by building a shrine to the spirit of water, to the essence of water, to what it symbolizes, to allow us to collectively remember that part of nature, to allow us to collectively realign ourselves to nature. So this is where we get examples such as this, right? These are shrines, right? Shrines made out of nature. The one on the right would be an example of a water shrine, right? So when it comes to these ritualistic practices, not that we're worshiping, water itself. It's not that we're, worshiping an animal itself. Is that we realize the divine intelligence of these things, so much so that we can humble ourselves to learn from them in an intentional setting, to allow the creator within those other things to remind the creator within us how to act, right? How to be in alignment with nature. We as human beings have free will, right? Animals and nature operates at the whim of the creator, essentially. They have instinct. They operate off of instinct. The creative thought and free will that we have as human beings, right, sometimes allows us to, we get to choose, whether or not to be in alignment, right? But when we find ourselves there, it is then our responsibility to return back to what is, you know what I'm saying? To return back to nature, to return back to more simple, a more simple and balanced existence, right? So this is what these times of ritual and, ceremony are designed for. It's designed for us to do that. But then, during the process of enslavement, when these Europeans would come in and say, and they would see this and they'd be like, these Europeans who would have come from and been taught by ancient Africans to become civilized themselves, right? They had to go to Africa to learn those things, or those ancient Africans had to come and civilize these people who would become Europeans, right? But then when they would come over and they would see some of our peoples, practicing these ceremonies or these rituals, they would be, they couldn't understand. They couldn't understand that, and it was, deemed primitive. Because you have to understand, those European people lacking melanin, lacking the history of reverence to nature, and lacking the experience of an abundance of nature, they don't have the same relationship to nature. They don't have, or they didn't have the same ability to connect with nature or to learn from nature, right? When you have the European people who like that stock of human being who would become depigmented in that way, they came from a nature that was very harsh and cold and deadly. So, their relationship to nature wasn't one where they could feel safe enough to learn something. In order to learn something from another source, you have to feel safe enough. You have to be receptive, right? To actually take anything in, right? So when they're seeing these things and they aren't receptive to them, so in other words, they're rejecting them, they're like, oh, that's primitive. Oh, that doesn't make sense. you know, oh, these people aren't intelligent. When in reality, what it is that these African people were doing were recalling thousands and thousands and thousands of years of ancient wisdom and observation of nature. The foundations of science is observation and experimentation, you know. So, it's important to note that. But over the process of enslavement, which I'll go into a little bit deeper, towards the end here, but when we got to the situation to where we had this way of existing with nature, but now we were being forced to, work these plantations, and, we're being forced to renounce our traditions and, read the Bible or, whatever else. We had to adapt our ways. We had to find ways to still maintain our connection to nature, right? To maintain our reverence to, where it is that we come from. So you may see something like this, right? The difference between this type of altar and these types of altars, right? Same type of purpose, same type of technology, but just adapted in a different way, right? This picture would be an example of something called a boveda, or a white table, right? In a Afro-Caribbean tradition of spiritism, or aligning ourselves with spirit, right? The spirit in all things. But one of the other, most fundamental aspects of these traditions were not only remembering our natural history, or I'm saying not only remembering our connection to nature, but also remembering our connection to our relatives, right? Remembering our ancestors. Those two aspects is what I would say make up every ancient or every traditional African practice. There's a respect for nature, there's a respect for ancestors, and there's a continuous developing of those relationships, a continued unification of those principles for the purpose of maintaining, again, the development of creative thought, the development of, this ability to put our mind over matter, right? Because when we're going through things, today, and we're stressed, and, we may not feel like we know what to do. These are the times when, a lot of us will approach God, right? We'll pray and engage in these spiritual practices, is to achieve that higher level of consciousness and wisdom, that goes beyond just the experiences of the flesh, right? So our ancestors who were going through enslavement, right, they were, it's amazing that our traditions still exist. It's not only a testament to the strength of our ancestors and the strength of their minds and their hearts and their spirits, but it's a testament to the truth in these things. If these things had no truth, then, they wouldn't exist. These things were not of nature, then they wouldn't exist, right? But I think we had to be careful when we get into, this question of morality, right? And this is probably the hardest thing about this concept of African spirituality, and as a Black American returning to it. I found myself asking myself this question: am I going to hell? This fear, this constant worry, because it's what I know in my heart is I'm simply aligning myself to nature and where it is that I come from. And as I've been doing this, I've never felt more closely to God. I've never felt more clear in my purpose. I've never felt more loving towards other people, towards myself. I'm getting all these benefits. I'm doing all this healing. But then on the other side of things, but what I've been told about what I'm even learning about right now is that it's demonic and, I'll be damned to hell if I continue down this path. That was very, very confusing and conflictive. And I'll say I've just now gotten to a point to where, you know, my understanding of the path that I'm on is more concrete. But for the past, 4 to 5 years, this question was really weighing on me, right? And I think it's something that a lot of people seeking to return to nature, seeking to return to the ancient wisdom of who we were and what we're capable of, this is a question and a fear that scares a lot of us away, right? And that is a part of the warfare, right? The first thing that they had to do was separate us from our cultural identity, and the energy that sustains a cultural identity is spirituality, right? It is spiritual practices. It is our understanding of ourselves and the world, and a concept that is bigger than just us as an individual, right? So that is why the first thing was missionaries. Right. But this narrative of, demon worship and going to hell and all that can really be traced back to the first thing I talked about, by just like, number one, a lack of understanding and a rejection. But then when we have situations like the Haitian Revolution, where, this small colony of African people who were engaging in their traditional practices were able to defeat, one of the greatest armies at the time, they were really just upset at the power of, our application of the truth. Right? These people were so connected with their ancestors, so connected with the nature, the land that they lived on, that no matter how many tools and machines, that these Europeans tried to attack them with and dominate them with, they were still able to, overcome. Right? So you have, these people who begin to come in and write history, right? A lot of history is based on primary documents, right? These European people who are coming into things that they have no idea about and writing what it is that they think that they are, or what it is that they see. If they were even doing that, right? They very well could have been making things up as well. And I think that that's, likely, right? So when we're talking about and questioning ourselves on this journey of returning back to our practices, if something is helping you become a better person, it cannot, evil cannot produce goodness. So the fact that I was experiencing, going back to my personal journey, the fact that I was experiencing this healing and this greater connection to the Most High, to myself, to others, to my family, to my purpose, was evidence of the goodness of what I was doing, was evidence of the truth, because truth brings clarity, right? So I'm getting more clear, right, on life and how I want to approach it. So it was good, There was no logical reason for me to question these things. There was programming, right? All that any of this is about is connecting with our ancestors as we relate to nature, right? It's about the understanding that no matter where I may be in life, no matter what I may be experiencing, millions and millions and billions of people had to experience nature and experience life for me to get here. Nature had to develop. The cosmos and the stars and the sun and the moon had to develop for billions and billions of years for me to even be here and experience this. So to give gratitude for that, to honor that, is what African spirituality is about, right? But over the process of, enslavement is where we get into all of these different types of traditions that there are, right? Traditions that would have been developed in West Africa, found their way to the Caribbean, right? So we see all these different pathways, right? We get all these different traditions that exist. I'm not, going to necessarily get into, all of the different types of traditions that there are, but just from what I've been able to observe, I feel like there are traditions that are a lot more associated with spiritual things, like things of a higher vibration and above this realm, but then there's also, like when we talked about the Haitian Revolution, there's also like these traditions that have aspects of them that are warlike and that have to do with, humanly experiences. But there's, everything in between. But I mean, when you look at a Southern Baptist church, me personally, I consider that to be a traditional African spirituality, just by the essence of it, you know what I'm saying? But you have this fellowship, you have this dance, you have, shouting and expression, you have music, and just this intentional time of release and realignment with what it is that is right and good and righteous, right? After living your week or, whatever, going through the struggles and the pains that we go through as human beings, right? But when we're asking the question, what is the fundamental purpose of African spirituality? It is about the ancestors and connecting to nature, but applied it's about a healthy black family. It's about sustaining procreation, and not only procreation on its fundamental level, but the procreation of good and righteous behavior, of happy families, of prosperity. A lot of us are not experiencing that right now, right? A lot of us are not procreating and continuing on in our best interest as a black people, right? So there's a spiritual problem there. You know what I'm saying? That needs to be assessed, that needs to be reconciled, right? When we're dealing with today's world, a lot of it has to do with technology, right? A lot of it has to do with computers, right? Social media, where it's very easy to shape a narrative and influence the mind, right? To influence the big computer, right? To influence the big computer that is your brain, and therefore to influence the rest of your nervous system. If you're constantly flooded with information and, these ideas that, your culture is a certain way and that you only have certain options. These things are influencing us spiritually, right? So when it comes to why it's important for us to return back, it's important for us to take control of our lives and our communities again, right? It's a picture of, a black Wall Street community, right? These black professionals who were able to, they were so confident in themselves and their abilities in each other, and they were so spiritually grounded in our advancement in America that they were able to build these businesses, right? And of course, that was a threat, and a lot of those communities were destroyed. But today, that understanding and that importance does not leave us, right? That the necessity for us to continue to orient our energy towards that, right? So this is what African spirituality today is to me. It is the way that people of the African diaspora, whether you're here in America, you're in the Caribbean or Mexico, South America, on the continent of Africa, wherever else in the world, Europe. For us as a people, no matter what our differences may be, for us to, first of all, recognize the worldwide struggles that come along with the way that we look, but to collectively set our mind, our emotions, and our intentions on, righteousness, just like being good, and for the world to be of equal opportunity and, balance and harmony. To set our minds towards that amidst, whatever we got going on and whatever is happening. To be able to do that. And that's a difficult thing to do. It's a difficult thing to set your mind and your emotions on that when the world is as it is, right? So what I see when it comes to African spirituality is I see it just as I see black creativity as a technology, as a means for us to carry ourselves into the future. That returning to these practices, right? Understanding our alignment to nature, understanding our connection to our ancestors, understanding how to divine, understanding how to heal and engage in alternative medicine, understanding how to meditate. Not that each and every one of us needs to do this, but that there are people in our community that do it and that can help all of us continue to stay balanced towards, a collective positive reality, right? Because when you're talking about a traditional African community, it was likely that everybody wasn't a spiritualist, so to speak. Everybody wasn't a priest or a priestess. Everybody, wasn't a medicine person. Everybody had their daily lives that they went along with, but they understood these people, who were oftentimes elders, as the people that they could go to realign themselves with nature when we as humans allow our free will, allow these external disturbances to disrupt our connection to the easiest path towards our purpose. Right? When I say the easiest path, I don't mean to say that life is easy, right? Because challenge obviously has to be a part in order for there to be growth. But I think a lot of us deal with a lot of unnecessary things. A lot of us are dealing with a lot of baggage from things that we didn't even experience ourselves, but these generational traumas. So when we're talking about moving forward into a positive reality, African spirituality and this reverence for the ancestors and nature is very important. And this is it's very difficult for me personally to think about a lot of other things, just because the impact that this realm of study has had on me, and the way that I move, and create art. This is where I see myself fitting into the collective, right? When it comes to this journey of self-improvement and black empowerment, black liberation, I think it's a mental thing more than anything. It's a spiritual, emotional thing. To reconnect ourselves back to that creative thought of our ancestors, and that which is in alignment with the laws of nature, is the state of mind, the state of creation, the state of being that will allow us to create our freedom beyond, what it is that's imposed upon us through these technologies. I see it as spiritual warfare when these news platforms are, fear mongering and all these other things, just as I see, our past of these people writing these things and demonizing our practices as spiritual warfare. You know what I'm saying? So I think that there's a certain level of militancy and discipline that comes along with this realm of being as well. That's important to me, and that is why it's difficult for me to engage with other things, because the drive and the necessity and the purpose behind engaging in traditional African spirituality and learning about it and helping other people along their journey of learning about it is very important to me. But with that said, please leave any questions, comments. Do the African spiritual systems have sacred text or scriptures. Yeah, um, different traditions have, different text or different written versions to um, their philosophies. The like ancient Egypt has many, many different texts, on different subject matters. Um, but for example, Ifa from Nigeria it's not necessarily, it didn't begin as a written text, but it was a oral collection of oral wisdom called the Odu of Ifa. Um, but, other traditions may not necessarily have, scriptures in the traditional sense, but, may have symbols that they go by. But even a traditional like I was talking about Baptist Christianity as a traditional African spirituality, a lot of women in the South who were hoodoo practitioners or root women used the book of Psalms in the Bible, when they did their spiritual work or their spiritual realignment. They used sacred texts that already exist. But there are, sacred texts that have to do with specific traditions, yeah. Are there still misconceptions of African spirituality? I would say so. I think that even though I have noticed like my generation and the generation before becoming more involved with these traditions, um, I would say at large the black community itself is still not receptive. Like there's still misconceptions within the black community itself, and I'm honestly not sure. Like in a greater context, I'm honestly not sure if I would say that. I mean, I know that there are still misconceptions, obviously, because like this country is ran off of Christianity, so there's misconceptions even towards like Islam and Muslim people. Um, but I'm curious to know how much more receptive are people across cultures to these traditional African spiritualities, because I see a lot of European people now, or just people of different cultures engaging in what's considered to be new age spirituality, but a lot of that information is rooted in African traditions or original traditions. But in terms of misconceptions, I think that there definitely still are misconceptions and probably will continue to be, just because I think difference of opinion is a human thing. But to begin to wrap up here, I do have my free journaling prompts in the description designed to help one with this process of, coming into awareness of their creative thought, of their connection to nature, of their connection to, their ancestry and our ancestral obligation as a people. I also have my ebook, Defeating Anxiety and Depression, on through art, which is a spiritual framework for how to engage in art to, heal oneself and to gain that clarity, that spiritual clarity. And, I have another question here of, does someone have to pick a side when it comes to, African spirituality? To me, African spirituality doesn't have a side. It is just an understanding that nature came before me and that my ancestors came before me. It's just respecting the facts. But then when we have, this concept of sides is where we're talking about like religions, right? The difference between spirituality and religions or specific traditions. I don't think that there needs to be sides, and I wouldn't advocate for that, I'm just saying I would like for us to all to have the common sense enough to acknowledge facts and science as it relates to human consciousness. But if you are Christian, that's fine. You know what I'm saying? If you're Muslim, that's fine. If you, are Taoist or into Hinduism, that's fine. And I find all that to be interesting, I think if you don't subscribe to any tradition, that's fine. But I think that when it comes to Black people, there's a lot of things missing. There's a lot of energy not moving in the right direction because we can't get over this concept of sides. So that's what I would say on that note. But with that said, hoping that everybody enjoys the rest of their evening, or if you're watching the replay, you enjoy it wherever you may be. And, leave a comment with your thoughts, any other questions. But I will see y'all next time. My next live. After my next live, I am going to take a break for the rest of the year, the month of December. So next live will be my last live for the rest of this calendar year, as I prepare for some new projects and new series. So yeah, with that said, peace and blessings.